Over the last 20 years, I've worked with hundreds of leadership teams, and I've seen every problem in the book. But there are four that, man, if you can just solve those four, everything else seems to come together. So let me take you through those four. And what I want you thinking about is not, oh, yeah, we do that, or oh, we don't make that mistake. But I want you to think of the level at which you're executing. This is not black and white. You don't either do it wrong or do it right. If you're doing it right, how could you do it better? If you're doing it wrong, how could you fix it? So don't automatically judge whether this is a mistake you're making or not. Reflect on how you're doing and how you can improve. So let me dive right in and talk about what I believe are the four biggest mistakes I see leadership teams make over and over again. And what I mean by biggest mistakes is number one, that I see it very often. And number two, that when I see it, it has a major impact on top and bottom line growth. It has a major impact on your ability to create a growing, fulfilling environment. It has a major impact on your ability to have impact. So let's dive into number one. And number one is not defining clear measures of success for the company, for each team, and for the members of the leadership team. And then that mistake tends to cascade down through the organization when you don't have clear measures of success. Now, most companies do have measures of success that they communicate as it relates to the profit and loss statement. Here's what we want top line revenues to look like this year or this quarter or this month. Here's what we want bottom line profitability to look like. Now, even there, I find, especially in closely held businesses, that's not even shared. We might tell the organization what revenues we want to hit, but we don't share anything around margins or profitability. And what that means is everybody's focused on bringing in more business, but they don't understand how to focus on how to do it more profitably or why doing it more profitably is important. So I'll start with saying most share P&L, but some don't even share that. And that means folks are flying blind. But let's go beyond P&L because my sense is for most of you, you are sharing revenue, cost of goods sold, gross margin, net income, EBITDA, whatever those measures are. My guess is for most of you, you're sharing it. But what about understanding for the marketing team or for your head of marketing, what does success look like? What about for the finance team or the human resources team? What does success look like? That's easy enough to do when it comes to the sales team. That's the easy one. What does success look like? We need X dollars in more revenue. We need this many more clients. Therefore, you need to have this many meetings. From a sales standpoint, most organizations get that because it's such a measurable function. But how do we measure marketing? Are you successful at marketing if the new website looks great? If a whole lot of people clicked on your last email marketing campaign, if the logo has a lot of cool colors, if you have a lot of followers on Instagram, is that how you measure success of marketing? Or should a measure of success of marketing be how many marketing qualified leads, closable leads, marketing identifies and processes to pass on to the sales team. See, how you measure marketing is going to tell your marketing team where they ought to focus. And if you're focusing them on making sure the new website is delivered on time and on budget, that's what they will do. But is it going to drive any marketing qualified leads that are closable for the sales team? I don't know. What about finance? If all finance is focused on is making sure the financial reporting is done 2 weeks before the end of the month, and that's what they're going to focus on. They're going to focus on a very tactical outcome. Most think finance is accountable for net profit. They're not. Finance reports on net profit, but they're not bringing in the revenue. They're not hiring and firing everybody. They're not working on productivity within the operations team. They're not solely accountable for net profit. But what about making them accountable for net cash flow, for optimizing cash based on the net profit that comes in? Again, that will drive very different activities. What about human resources? How are you measuring that human resources is successful? If you're measuring how quickly they're filling jobs, then they will do just that. They will fill jobs quickly. They will push leaders and line managers to hire quickly. Is that really what you want them to do? Or do you want them accountable? Do you want them to measure success by the talent level, what I call the talent density within the organization? How many high performers do we have? How many low performers do we have? If you're measuring what I call the talent density indicator, which is percent high performers minus percent low performers, you're going to motivate them, you're going to incent them to bringing on the right people, to putting coaching and development processes in place that will develop, build, strengthen the talent that you have. They will put in place processes to make sure you're retaining the best talent, that you're making the tough decisions on your low performers. So if you're struggling for a function, what the right measures of success are, here are some questions that may help you identify how to measure success. First, when you think of a role, even if you're the CEO, your role as CEO, when you think of a role, what's the mission of that role? And how does the role contribute to the mission of your company? How do you know if you're succeeding or failing in that mission? What would have to happen for a person leading that role to deserve a promotion? And again, as you're answering these questions, think about specific, measurable ways to answer these questions. Lastly, what would have to happen for you to want to fire a person in that role? The answers to those questions are going to help drive you to something that's more measurable than the website's delivered on time, or more meaningful than the website's delivered on time, or our new logo looks really. So the first mistake is not defining clear, specific measures of success. Let's go to mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 is having too many priorities. Very often when I speak to leaders and I say, what's most important for the next year, or what's most important for the next 90 days? First thing is they need to think about it, which doesn't sound so bad, but if they need to think about it, that means it's probably not clear and it probably hasn't been communicated to the company, to their teams, because they're trying to come up with it on the spot. Second thing that happens is when I ask that question, what's most important? What are your top priorities for the next year or the next quarter? Is they will rattle off 8 or 9 or 12 or 15 things. Well, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. I believe you should have 3 or so top priorities. And when I say 3, it might be 1 or 2. At most, it might be 4 or 5, but 3 or so top priorities. That focuses the organization. Normally, when I do it with my clients, when we talk about quarterly priorities and we call those rocks, I actually break it down into what are called company rocks and functional rocks. So for the company, there are 2 or 3 or 4 most important top priorities that are top priorities for everyone to align around, move towards. These are the priorities. If you're working on something else, why? Everything you do should be aligned with those priorities. But then there may be and not maybe in most of the time, for each of the functions, sales, marketing, finance, operations, legal, HR, etc., IT, there are typically 2 or 3 or 4 priorities within those functions that I call functional rocks. The best place for those functional rocks to come from is something that you can do within IT or within finance or in marketing that aligns with one of the top 2, 3, or 4 company rocks. So we need to make sure that the CEO can get in front of the company and say, we are super excited about the next year. And to achieve what we want to achieve, to move this company forward into the future, there are 3 things we need to have relentless focus on. Those are your 3 top priorities. When the COO is in front of the operations team, that COO needs to reiterate the 3 most important things for the company are 1, 2, 3. And in order to align around that, as an operations team, here are the 3 things that are most important we do to make that happen for the company. So we need to make sure we don't have too many priorities. We also need to make sure that those priorities are specific and measurable. And I like to make sure they're outcome driven. What do I mean by specific, measurable, outcome driven? Well, saying we're going to work on a leadership development program over the next 90 days is not specific and measurable. What does we're going to work on a leadership development program mean? Now let's make it more specific and measurable. What if we said over the next 90 days, we are going to design and be ready to implement a new leadership development program that we will use for our 40 people in leadership positions? Well, that's specific and measurable, but it's not outcome driven. The reason I focus on it being outcome driven or value driven is it's possible that you can get all that done. You can create this leadership development program and it adds no value. You create a program that's never implemented. You create a program that's implemented, but it's not taken seriously. You create a program that's not very good, so it doesn't add the value. Well, the fact that we designed and we're ready to implement the program, or even that we've implemented the program, is that helping the company move forward? Not necessarily. Outcome driven says we're not going to focus on getting the tasks done. We're going to focus on what the outcome is. from those tasks. So instead of saying we're implementing a new leadership development program, or we're designing and getting ready to implement a new leadership development program, what if we said we're going to improve our talent density in 90 days by 15%? That's outcome driven. Now, you may very well implement a leadership development program to support you doing that, but it may not be the only thing you do. And when you're doing it with a specific outcome in mind, and you are not successful until you achieve that outcome. So, number one mistake was not defining measures of success. Number two was having too many priorities. Let's move on to number three. Number three is not making talent development your number one priority. One of the things where we tend to decrease our investment when times are tough is talent development. The last thing we think about very often is talent development. We'd much rather talk about strategy. What new markets should we penetrate? What new products should we develop? All that's important. But unless you've got great people, it's not happening. You could have a great strategy with mediocre people. You will fail every time. You can have a mediocre strategy with great people, and those great people will figure out a way. The number one driver of profit growth is people growth. We need to make people growth number one. People growth is not discussed and debated enough. Maybe when it comes time to annual performance reviews, and God, I hate those processes. I think annual performance reviews are the worst invention ever created in business. And if you're saying, well, I know that's why we do it quarterly, so you're doing a crappy process 4 times a year. We need to be debating, challenging, discussing talent within our organizations, within my process. And I talk about it in my book, Breakthrough Leadership Team. It will be in Strength of Talent when that comes out, depending on when you're listening to this. Strength of Talent may already be out. But I talk about something called the QTAM, the Quarterly Talent Assessment Meeting. And that's where you as a leadership team get together and assess the productivity and culture fit of all of your direct reports. Your CEO, if you're the CEO, you should be doing that quarterly for your leadership team as well, for your direct reports, where you're discussing and debating how they're doing and talking about actions related to how they're doing. So talent development isn't discussed or debated enough. We also don't focus enough on the right actions to take. And kind of a mistake within a mistake, the mistake I see most often within talent development is most leaders overinvest in their low performers and underinvest in their high performers. Talent development is not all about taking your lowest performers and bringing them up and just letting your high performers do their thing. What's going to happen is you may bring up some of your low performers, but your high performers are going to come down and you're going to wind up with mediocre. We need to focus, number one, on your highest performers. What are you doing to challenge them? What are you doing to recognize them, to reward them, to give them exposure, to increase their responsibilities, to promote them, to re-recruit them? So we need to focus actions mostly on our high performers. Of course, we need to focus actions on our low performers and figure out whether we're coaching up or coaching out. And of course, we need to work with our medium performing folks and do everything we can to improve their productivity and or improve their culture fit to help them become high performing members of the team. We also need to make sure, as a replacement for the dreaded annual performance review, that we're having the right one-on-one discussions with our direct reports. if not weekly, no less frequently than every other week. And those one-on-one meetings are not just times to get together and say, what do you want to talk about? I believe there are two specific focuses, actually two types of one-on-one meetings that I recommend. One happens even weeks, one happens odd weeks. One type is called the feedback and accountability meeting. Feedback and accountability, that meeting, that one-on-one meeting, the agenda is set by the leader. The leader is setting an agenda focused on what they want to hold their direct report accountable for, what projects, what KPIs do they want to talk about? What feedback do they want to give them based on things they've done well or things they need to work on? So every other week is the feedback and accountability meeting. And if you do that right, there's no reason to wait to the end of the quarter or the end of the year to do an annual performance review. And of course, this is no substitute for giving people feedback in the moment. But one meeting every other week, feedback and accountability meeting. Second type of meeting is the coaching meeting. In the coaching meeting, the agenda is set by the person being coached. If you're the leader, it's set by your direct report. And that meeting is focused on wherever they need help. They come to that meeting saying, hey, I could really use some coaching on how to build a stronger relationship with the head of customer service. I could really use some coaching on how to better ensure that this project is completed on time, on budget. I could use some coaching on how to take the next step in my career and what I need to do next. So one-on-one meetings are a critical part of talent development. Having difficult discussions is another critical part. Most leaders put off those critical discussions until things have gotten so bad, things explode. We need to put our big boy pants on or a big girl pants on and have the difficult discussions. That's a major part of talent development, difficult discussions and maybe difficult decisions. So first big mistake is not defining clear measures of success. Second is having too many priorities. Third is not making talent development priority number one. And the fourth is thinking small. There's a book out there called 2X is Easier Than 10X by, I think it's Darren Hardy and Dan Sullivan. Now, by the way, I don't really recommend the book because there are certain books that should have been 30-page pamphlets, but it needed to be a book, so they say the same thing over and over again. And I apologize to Darren or Dan or any big fans of theirs listening that may take that as an insult. But while the book is pretty repetitive, the idea behind the book is so powerful. 10X is easier than 2X. Most leaders and leadership teams think small, think incrementally. That's the 2X. When we need to think bigger. We need to think about new and exciting and reinventing ourselves or reinventing our teams or reinventing our companies. And that's the 10X. And now, why is 10X easier than 2X? And I hope I said that right a minute ago. It's 10X is easier than 2X. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you're focused on the 2X, if you're focused on incremental change, if you're focused on improving by 10%, there are 1,000 ways to do that. And 990 of them may not work very well. And even if they do, you're improving by 10% and so's everybody else. So you're pretty much staying with the pack. So improving by 2X, incremental change is not easy. It's actually hard. There are a lot of decisions to make and they may or may not work. The reason why improving by 10X is easier is because to get 10X better, there are not 1,000 different ways to get you there. There might be one or two or three that are more likely to get you there, that are exciting, that the organization could get behind, that people are going to be passionate about. I was recently working with a client, and they're a service company. They wanted to get into a brand new service area that they had never done before, but it was consistent with their overall purpose. And there was incredible opportunity in that new line of service. Well, they immediately thought about it incrementally, or kind of a 2x mindset, and thought, well, we haven't done it before. We're going to need to go out and prospect, and that's going to take some time. We've got to build this service, and that's going to take some time. We've got to build our expertise, and that's going to take some time. So their number for the first year was very low and not very exciting. But when I asked them to put their 10x hat on, to think bigger, what if instead of it being a small business the first year, what if in the first year you created a big business that was a significant chunk of your overall revenue? What if that was your goal? How would you make that happen? And there weren't 1,000 different ways to make that happen. There were two major ways they came up with to make that happen. One is to buy a smaller company, buy another company that's already doing that. And the second was to hire someone who was leading that function in a different company, steal them away, and get a head start on building that business. Thinking incrementally, you don't think about those things. Thinking 10x, thinking big and exciting. You think of those things. And by the way, buying a company that does it, or hiring away the expert that's the best around at doing it, is a whole lot easier than building it incrementally. So that fourth mistake is, as a leadership team, thinking too small, thinking 2x instead of 10x. And 10x is easier than 2x. So again, just summarizing those four mistakes. Number one is not defining clear measures of success. Number two is having too many priorities. Number three is not making talent development number one. And number four mistake is thinking too small. There are 1,000 things you can do to improve your leadership team. But if you focus on not making those mistakes and improving those four things, I promise you, your team will be stronger, your company will be stronger, you will have greater impact on your clients, less stress, less frustration, less overwhelm, more fulfillment. I always say, if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. I hope I got you there, or at least closer there today. See you next time.